The biggest value on fantasy football draft boards going into the summer is that and more this week on the couch, joined by one of the big guns. So you're going to come through for us here, Michael Fabiano.
Big
Who
Gun,
is
the Big
Big
Gun.
Gun?
It's actually a
You
great
know,
Skid Row song from their first album. I happen
oh
to love
yeah.
80s hair
If
bands, so
if
the
Cecil
Big
was here,
Guns.
he would very much approve of you derailing us into hair metal before we even talk about the most important fantasy football take of this show, which is who's your biggest value? Put together your tiers over at SI. Who's your biggest
Uh-huh.
value on the board?
I know that Raheem Mostert's not gonna score 21 touchdowns again, but, I mean, I'm looking at ADPs and, this guy's the RB30. Like, I mean, that's listen, I get regression, but that's just straight out disrespect. Um,
Mm-hmm.
he same offense, and I don't know that, Jalen Wright will come in and make an impact unless Mostert gets hurt, and I know Mostert, is in his early 30s, and he's had a lot of touches, but, I mean, get him as like a flex, especially if you're focusing on wide receivers, in the first 7 or 8 rounds and get him. I mean, that's like stealing. And I know that he's moving up, but Jameson Williams, I think this is the breakout year for him, or at least a career season is going to be in the cards for him, because the bottom line here is that he is not an opportunity to be. Now he's not going to be the guy because you've got Amon Ra, you've got Laporta, but now Josh Reynolds is in Denver. He is going to be a big part of that Detroit offense this season. And remember, this is a guy who, coming out of college, if he hadn't gotten hurt, might have been the number one wide receiver pick that year that he came out. And he had
Right.
the suspension and he's had some injuries, but this kid is popping, and all you hear about in the offseason when you're talking about the Lions is how good he looks and how motivated he is. So that's another player that I think you could get as probably a wide receiver 4 type. And
Right.
then at tight end, it's such a thin position. I'm trying to give you a little bit of love at each spot. Quarterback, there's so many bargains, it's like ridiculous. So but at tight end, I kind of like Luke Musgrave going off the board. I mean, in the 140s as a tight end too, that could outplay his draft position.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff to unpack here. And again, folks, check out the tiers because this is the starting point in the off season. It's where strategies are born. Like you said, you can look at your quarterback tiers and say, "Wow, there's a lot of values. There's a lot of potential right answers." Let's talk about Mostert first because I spend a
Mhm.
lot of time. Fabs, I spend a lot of time looking at ADPs right now, and I spend a lot of time looking at ADPs as the product of the hive mind of fantasy football. And I look at things like comparing them to last year's ADPs, comparing them to last year's finishes, like you were saying with Raheem Mostert, and then even looking across an offense, because sometimes you'll see tension where it seems like, well, if you look at this player's ADP, fantasy football players are assuming something, but then that's
Right.
not
Yeah.
reflected in this other player's ADP, right? So,
Yep.
you look at Devin Achan's ADP, and he's at the end of the second round. I mean, he could be a first round value, but
Right.
he
Yep. Yep.
also he also had trouble staying on the field last year, so he also could
Hmm.
be somebody who's frustrating. The
Hmm.
Dolphins are indicating confidence. You're hearing that they're going to increase his workload, so they certainly don't seem to be worried about his durability.
Right.
But it's
Hmm.
Mostert based on the ADPs. It's Mostert is the one that fantasy football players are just writing off. Like they're just
Completely
assuming
writing off.
he's going to get
Yeah.
hurt when he actually has done a pretty good job staying healthy the last few years. And like you said,
Last couple of
if
years. Yep. Yeah,
and
and we
if
know
you're
regression's coming. I mean, like, there's no question about that. That's just not going to happen. He had 21 touchdowns. I mean, that he had more than in any combined year in his career before that. I mean, it was just a magical season. But also, when you look back at the numbers, it was a little bit odd and maybe surprising that when Mostert and Achan were playing in the same game, Mostert actually out touched him and had more
yeah,
touches than when he was out, and he outscored him on a points per game basis. So
right,
Mostert was better with Achan, which is very strange when you consider that we would think that the opposite would be true. But
right,
Mostert was very good regardless. And remember, I mean, there was a few pop games. There was that
hmm
one game where they just both went bananas. And
yeah,
so, that's going to jack up. I think he scored like 43 points one week. So, I mean, that's
right,
going to jack up Mostert's. But He's in an explosive offense that's going to get him opportunities in the red zone. And yeah, is Achan going to be the better fantasy back? We think so. Uh, when you look at the ADP, we obviously think so. But
Mhm.
uh, Mostert's getting disrespected. I mean
Yeah,
that's a drop. That's a drop for a guy who is coming off a bad year that we expected good things from. This
right.
guy we expected bad things from, and he's coming off a great year. So
Right, right, exactly. And even if to save some wear and tear on Achane, they just give Mostert those goal line touches, that
mhm,
alone could justify. I mean, even if Achane moves ahead of him in terms of the slicing of the pie. And you mentioned Jalen Wright, and I just want to add in there that Jalen Wright is somebody that should be on everybody's late round draft
yes,
list just to get a
yes,
piece of the situation. Because that's the thing.
mhm,
You had a game last year when I think each of them, Achane and Mostert, had 4 touchdowns in one game. That's how good this running game is, and
mhm,
Wright seems to be a great fit. So you want to get a piece of this running game. Let's talk about Jameson Williams. You brought him up. I think this is a really good one because the first year and a half, year and 3/4 of Jameson Williams' career was consistent with being a bust, right? Even the things the team were saying about him, right? He needs more reps and all this stuff, right? And then you saw more trust as the season went on last year, and now you're hearing all the right things coming out of
mhm,
OTAs, like you're saying. And Josh Reynolds is gone. And this is an offense that seems like they can amplify the value of whoever it is going to be able to maximize the output in their role. Another thing you
mhm,
mentioned quarterback really quick. I'll mention quarterback and say like there's so many values. One of them being Jared Goff, and this is something people are going to be tired of hearing. He doesn't even play outdoors until week 9, and
mhm.
then he doesn't play again
I will say
outdoors
this
until
though,
week 16.
that
Yeah,
that's a huge advantage. But if you look at Goff's numbers on the road in domes or retractable roof stadiums, he's still averaging 10.5 points per game. So like being in a dome or a retractable roof stadium hasn't necessarily equated to having a big fantasy stat line if he's not playing at Ford Field. It's really weird, right? Remember like
yeah,
when Ben Roethlisberger towards the end of his career, like Big Ben, like if he was at home, like he was golden. It
right.
was 20 to 25 points. And then on the road, he wasn't very good. And then, that kind of that trend kind of switched a little bit. But Goff, and yeah, listen, I mean, if we don't have to worry about weather, that's great. Best ball, it's great. It's sensational. The bottom line here is that when you look at the numbers in his time in Detroit, when he's played on the road, even in a game where there's no weather, dome, retractable roof, 10.5 points per game. So, not great. But I
No,
understand the advantage of 14 of 17 in the comfy confines of a dome or retractable roof stadium.
and even if it doesn't translate to Jared Goff's numbers, it's optimizing things for this offense. I mean, the Lions'
Mhm,
offense. I'll summarize and just say this way: any Lions player is I mean, Sam Laporta's probably drafted close to his ceiling. You shouldn't be taking the first tight end off the board in any fantasy football draft this year. We can talk a little more about tight end tiers, but Jameson Williams as somebody who could greatly exceed ADP. Absolutely, and then you mentioned Luke Musgrave, and I feel like this is one of those
mhm.
ones, Fabs. I don't know if are the people paying attention. I love Tucker Craft, and I love the Packers are
Yeah, he's
saying,
a good
"Hey,
player. Good
he's
player.
great," and the Packers are rightfully saying from a dynasty fantasy football standpoint, or just talking ball, both of these guys are starting tight ends. Both of these guys down the line are, I mean, good tight ends, and I love what
Mhm,
Tucker Craft did after the catch last year. Like, just go back and watch his plays if you haven't, y'all. Of what he's got reckless abandon after the catch. Like he's gonna lay it all out there, which is what we want. But Tucker Craft, when he was lifting this offseason, he said his pec just came off of the like it just detached. So they're hoping he's going to be back for training camp. But if the
mhm,
issue with Luke Musgrave was, well, but Tucker Craft, well, we're not even sure Tucker Craft's going to be ready for week 1, and they're
mhm.
probably still going to ease him in. So this Green Bay offense. So this is what an interesting angle too, because like I was saying, I've been staring at ADPs, Fabs. I've been staring at ADPs, and what's interesting about Green Bay's offense is that fantasy football players are intrigued, but they're not quite sure who to take, right?
Yeah, because there's so much
Four
talent. Yeah.
right, but Like, so 4 wide receivers are in the top 131 of drafts at Underdog, but nobody's higher than 58. Even
Mhm.
Josh Jacobs is a reasonably priced 4th round pick, or if you like Marshawn Lloyd better, you can get him in the 140s. And then there's Luke Musgrave in the 150s. And he's a big play tight end. And
Mhm.
in a time when people like to stream tight ends, it would just make a lot of sense, knowing that Kraft's going to start slow, to start out with Luke Musgrave, and maybe that's all you have to do. Maybe Musgrave hits as a second-year player. He's an incredible athlete and already showed he was ahead of his development curve last year. Green Bay is going to be interesting, and it may be something where it changes over the course of the season, right? Like for 1 month, you want to be having Dontavian Wicks, and the next month is going to be a Christian Watson month when he's healthy or whatever. Green Bay could be a moving target.
Yep.
Let's go back. Let's go back to your tiers, because, like you said, quarterback. There's not a lot of nuance, except that there's a lot of values. And well, who's one of your favorite values among the quarterbacks?
I love Jayden Daniels, but I mean, is he a value? I mean, I guess if you look at his average draft position, he could be. But I could see him having an RG3 type of rookie year. I really could. Love the mobility and the rushing upside that he brings. And I mean, the Commanders have some good weapons on offense. They brought in my pal Austin Eckler, and they've got Robinson and McLaurin, and Dotson hasn't hit his ceiling certainly yet. So I think there's some definite upside there. But I let's put it this way: I'm not going to come out and say that Bryce Young is going to break out, but
Mm-hmm.
almost every single year for the last, geez, I mean, almost decade, we've had a second year quarterback outplay his ADP. Like last year, like Purdy, I thought Pickett was going to be good. I was wrong. He sucked. But Purdy was, tremendous in his second year. So out of some of the second year quarterbacks, Bryce Young, you add Deontay Johnson, you've got Thielen, you add Jonathan Brooks, and maybe he'll be better than we project. Now, I don't have him ranked as more than like a really low QB2, but if I'm throwing a dart, if I have Patrick Mahomes or have one of the elite quarterbacks and I'm just looking to throw a dart somewhere late on a QB2 because I ain't going to waste my time drafting anybody else, I'll throw a dart at a Bryce Young. This was the number one overall pick, like not that long ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I get it, the size. Last year, he just it was it was like I don't want to say it was like Trevor Lawrence's rookie year, with the whole mess with Urban Meyer, but like now he's got an offensive minded head coach. He's got more weapons.
Yeah.
And I think he can't be worse. And I think that's a player that people have kind of like, it's only 1 year. And he wasn't in the best situation. Hell, I don't know if CJ Stroud would have done what he did if he had gotten picked
Yes.
by the Panthers last year. So I think Bryce Young is someone that also I would, I'm a little interested in. He's going, as those of us from the Northeast like to say, wicked late. But
Yeah.
quarterbacks are so there's just so many good potential values. I mean, hell, like, Kyler Murray is, you could get him around what in
Yeah.
the after the top 80, 90 picks. And, Caleb Williams is coming into a situation in Chicago. I mean, how many rookie quarterbacks come into a situation that good with
Yeah.
all those
Yeah.
weapons? It's very rare. I mentioned Daniels, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll say this too. As much as we don't like Deshaun Watson, probably as a human being, and people are like, he's done. The durability issues are certainly a concern, but he averaged almost 18 points per game in the games that he played and finished last year. And I know it's only a small sample size. I think it was like 5 games, but he had 3 games over 18 points. And now they have Jerry Jeudy. The Browns
Mm-hmm.
have some pretty good offensive weapons. Obviously, you got Amari Cooper there, and you've got Njoku there, and Chubb's coming back from the knee, and Jerome Ford had his moments last year. So all of a sudden, like I can get Deshaun Watson really late. Now I might feel icky about it,
Right.
right? But he wasn't terrible last year. Like actually wasn't he averaging 17.7 points per game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. And the way you laid that out was good. And it's another opportunity to say super flex leagues are fun, because then getting in on
Mhm.
a Bryce Young or a Deshaun Watson or Will Levis, maybe the second year quarterback that breaks out is Will
That's
Levis.
another
You know, hit
great
hit
spot and
hit
offensive minded head coach now. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I love how you're bringing up coaches. Everything should be 30,000 foot view right now at fantasy. And we're not committing too much to anything. We're just getting the lay of the land. And we're trying to understand, well, what are the differences from last year that we should be thinking about? You mentioned Bryce Young, Dave Canales, who has overseen now Baker Mayfield's resurgence in Tampa and Geno Smith's resurgence in Seattle. And
Mhm.
likewise, Ken Dorsey. Why did the Bills fired Ken Dorsey midseason? Why would the Browns? Oh, first of all, probably because he's better than Alex Van Pelt, who's the Patriots are trusting to get
Patriots, yeah.
Drake May up to speed. But because of what Ken Dorsey did with Cam Newton and because of what Ken Dorsey did with Josh Allen. So
Mhm.
it's a Deshaun Watson centric hire. My brain's getting ahead of my mouth here.
That's
Uh,
fine. Happens to me
so
all the time.
why? Well, that's all we do. We get paid to talk.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the values real quick. I'll just say you can't really go wrong, right? And there's that section in their draft. I would say don't take one of the top 7 quarterbacks, except maybe Anthony Richardson. If Anthony Richardson stays healthy, we could see him crash that Hurts, Allen, Mahomes, Lamar Jackson tier. And I think
Mhm.
you rightfully have those four as the tier ahead of the pack, but everything is within Richardson's reach to join them.
Mhm.
And then Stroud's probably a little overrated. Burrow, Burrow could be a hit, but boy, it would be nice to see him get through a season healthy before we really decide
Yep.
to invest in him again. But then you get to this tier, like you said, Dak Prescott, at the second half of the year last year, he was quarterback 2. Jordan Love,
He was
second half of
he
the
was
year last
great.
year, he was,
I'm
yeah,
a Cowboys fan too, by the way. So, and I'm a very
sorry.
unbiased Cowboys fan. We sucked for I hate Jerry Jones so much. It's a bane of my existence.
Yeah.
But Dak was awesome. And this is the first year. Like, honestly, like I was talking about this on the Believe Fantasy Football podcast with myself and the great Lizzie Rhodes this week. Name me a year where the Cowboys backfield has come into a season like crappier.
Right,
Like I get,
right.
for lack of a better term. And I went back to like the Joe Randall year.
Mm,
But even that year, like Randall had 6 games and then they booted him because he was a knucklehead.
yeah.
And then Darren McFadden was really good.
Yeah.
So, like, I mean, I'd probably have to go back to like, you remember Troy Hambrick? I mean, it's
Sure.
been because you had like Felix Jones and Marion Barber. They have not come into the season with like a worse backfield situation. Than I can't remember. It's been so long. It's been so long. So that might even behoove the Cowboys to throw the ball even more. Who
Right,
knows? And I think
right.
Jalen Tolbert could make an impact this year. Maybe not in fantasy so much, but for the
Mhm.
Cowboys, Ferguson was really good last year.
Yep.
Obviously, Brandon Cooks, has his moments, and you've got CD, and let's hope the Cowboys sign him. The Cowboys are a mess right now in terms of the salary cap, though, because you got Dak, who's making what 50 plus million. You
Mhm.
got to pay CD. You got to pay Micah Parsons. I mean, I don't know. Jerry Jones, the guy drives me out of my mind. That's
Yeah.
another story for another podcast.
No,
But
this is go ahead. It is on the couch.
Dak,
I mean, this is what we're here
Dak,
for.
Dak, Dak Prescott. I need to be on the couch to talk about Jerry Jones. Dak Prescott. Maybe he's not going to duplicate what he did last year, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did, and he'll be damn close. And
Yeah.
he's also, remember, folks, this is a walk year for him. So
Exactly.
if he goes out there and has a really good year, there's going to be teams like the team. You see that helmet right there behind me that's got the NY on it. I have
Ooh.
nightmares of Dak Prescott wearing a Giants uniform next season, because the Giants are going to need a quarterback. And Dak, I don't know that the Cowboys are going to bring him back. I mean, I hope we do, but that's the possibility is that the Giants need a quarterback and Dak could be available. So, anyways, let's not get into that because
Yeah.
that's going to make me very upset. But yeah, I mean, where you can get Dak Prescott, even coming off of the season that he had last year. I mean, hell, Kyler's going ahead of him. Joe Burrow's going ahead of him.
Right.
Love's going ahead of him. Stroud's going ahead of him. If depending on where you're looking in terms of average draft position. I mean, is that right? I don't know.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
I'll answer that. It's not. Well, because again, so I'm looking at ADPs and then I'm looking at results last year. And Dak Prescott is ranked around his average from last year, but Brian Schottenheimer, Mike McCarthy, perhaps we all know the geniuses, the two biggest offensive geniuses in the NFL. Well, they were last year. They came out of the bye, after the bye, and
Yeah.
you can make a distinct line between before and after the bye. And after the bye is when they started throwing a lot more to CD Lamb, just throwing a lot more.
Mhm.
And Dak Prescott was quarterback 2 and just a hair off of quarterback 1, who I think was Josh Allen. I could be wrong. Well, depending on your scoring system.
Yeah.
And so he shouldn't be ranked if he finished at quarterback 8, but was quarterback 2 after the adjustments were made. He should be closer to quarterback 2. But I think it's just because of the ceiling of so many of these quarterbacks. Kyler Murray is another one that he's going to be 1 year removed from an ACL, and Marvin Harrison's in the top 15 of drafts. So if we're projecting
Mhm.
Marvin Harrison to make a top 15 of the draft impact,
Mhm.
and Trey McBride's a top 50 pick. So we're saying that Kyler Murray, who's a running quarterback, is going to support 2 top 50 options in the passing game. He should not be quarterback 8 or 9, but somebody has to be, because we have so many high scoring quarterbacks. And then Jordan Love, who was just surrounded by ascendant talent. Caleb Williams, surrounded by talent. So yeah, all this is looking pretty good. And listen, I'm a Western Pennsylvania born and bred Steelers fan, okay? And I just
Mhm.
did a show with Thomas Emmerich. Thomas Emmerich does this awesome show where he gets somebody to come and you just are nostalgic and you relive an old game with him. And we just did the Steelers Colts 95 AFC Championship game,
Was that the
which I
Harbaugh
think
game?
exactly.
Mm.
Harbaugh, going back and watching that game, he was a better quarterback than I remember. I mean, he was,
He had his moments. Yeah, he had his moments.
yeah, I mean, in a Ryan
Captain Comeback,
Fitzpatrick,
they used to call him.
yeah, yeah, he
Yeah.
would keep his team in the game, not with amazing physical talent or anything like that, just because he's that kind of guy. It's not that hard to picture him becoming a great head coach when you see that. But the Steelers eked that one out, aged about 10 years during that game. And then the Cowboys stole the Super Bowl. I hope that you enjoyed that last Super Bowl. That was the Steelers Super Bowl, right?
Stole the Super Bowl?
Neil O'Donnell stole their Super Bowl.
Your quarterback's throwing a ball to the wrong guy. I
Yeah, I
mean, that's
know.
not my
I
fault.
know. Yeah, I know. I know. Well, anyway,
I
but
sent
enjoy
Neil
that. We'll
O'Donnell a
see.
nice
The
fruit
Cowboys have
basket after that game too.
yes, yes. Oh, tears, tears. Speaking of tears, there's a transition for you. When you put
Mm.
together your running back tiers right now, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, are all out over at SI.
Yep.
Tight end soon to follow.
Mhm.
When you put together your running back
Tomorrow, yep.
tiers, what's surprised you? What stood out? What's something that you had to go back and be like, yeah, I guess this guy belongs in this tier, even though I wouldn't have thought that before I started this exercise.
So I struggled with James Cook because I almost wanted to rank him higher. But I have him in the high RB2 tier, so tier 5. Uh I I and listen, I mean, we're going to change our minds 100 times until we get to the start of the regular season. But like I could see him being in that Jacobs, Henry, Rashad White, Pacheco tier that I have.
Higher.
James Cook, when Dorsey got canned and it was Joe Brady, he was averaging like 16.7 fantasy
Yes.
points per game. His touches were like ballpark 19, 18 per game. He was very good. They didn't bring anybody in, at least in my opinion, that's going to contend for touches. And I was never like a big James Cook guy. I kind of thought, he's kind of a smallish kind of back. I don't know if he
Mhm,
could be a
mhm.
featured back. And, in the second half of last year, he showed that he certainly could. It was funny. I did the research on that in terms of, Dorsey versus Brady. They went they went from like 20th to second in run percentage from Dorsey to Brady. And then the pass percentage like dropped significantly. I think they were like 31st in pass percentage, but Josh Allen averaged 2 more points per game, or about a point and a half points more per game with Brady than he did with Dorsey. And that's, I guess, because, you rush for 15 touchdowns and, stuff like
Right,
that's going to
right.
happen. But James Cook is a guy that I could see like moving up. I mean, what is it, June 5th? I mean, I
Mhm.
could see him moving up a little bit more as we get deeper and deeper into the year in the summer months. But he's the guy that I almost wanted to put in there, but I was like, well, do I put him ahead of Achan? I don't know, but I don't think Achan belongs with this other group because he's not a true featured back. So that's a player that I struggle with. And another thing too is like, dude, you get into like tier 6 and 7, and there's some really good players
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Really good players. Like that was not the case years ago
Mm-mm.
when the running backs ruled the roost, which is not the case anymore. I mean, hell, tier 6, James Conner was a league winner for a lot of folks last year.
Right,
Now he's not
right.
super durable. They brought in Trey Benson, but still, Zach Moss. I mean, if that guy can look anything like he did in the first few weeks with the Colts and then be a featured back in Cincinnati, woo, giddy up.
Right, right.
Now, I mean, I got Raheem Mostert, and again, maybe I'm
Yeah.
disrespecting him too. It's a tier 7 guy, it's a low RB2 type. Jonathan Brooks, I don't know about the ACL. The reports have been pretty good, but maybe he inches his way into being a top 15 running back. Zamir White in the 4
Mhm.
games after Josh Jacobs was injured, I mean, he was very good. He was more effective and more efficient than Jacobs was behind that offensive line. There's good options out there. I'm not saying running back is like super, super deep because there's a lot of backfield committees that you're going to have to navigate. But because of the strategies that people are going to employ now, which is going to involve going heavy wide receiver, there's going to be better running backs later in drafts than, even maybe last year.
Yeah, let's take Cook first. This is
Mhm.
choice advice you're giving out, though. Um, Cook, I think, again, I'm looking at ADP and I'm looking at last year's results. And like you said, after that game, I think it was the Denver game that got Ken Dorsey fired. And then after that game, I think in PPR leagues, Cook was like running back 5. Running
Yeah,
back
he was.
5.
Yeah. Yep.
He was tremendous. And like you said, Josh Allen turned into Jalen Hurts without the tush push and got all the rushing touchdowns. So even if James Cook just starts getting like 1 out of every 3 of those, just a little bit.
Mhm.
Now James Cook is flirting, with Kyron Williams kind of numbers from last year. And why would the philosophy change? They retain Joe Brady. That's a vote of
Mhm.
confidence in Joe Brady. So if we're looking at projecting this offense, you're probably looking at James Cook projected like he was after Joe Brady took over last year. So why is he available in the 4th round? Running back with his outlook should be, like you said, in the 2nd or 3rd round. So you take advantage. But it's not just that when you wait at running back. And I looked at this last year, and last year, if you just did a
Mhm.
really straightforward strategy and you just targeted like the 10 lowest ranked running backs that were projected to lead their team in touches. That's it. Just a real simple criteria. You were going to profit. I mean, there were 2 or 3 busts in there, but a lot of the biggest hits in fantasy football running back last year were guys that, well, we knew they were the likely to, I don't even say lead back, because like you said, there are committees and things like that. And those kinds of running backs in the past have been the quote unquote dead zone running backs that were like 4th and 5th round running backs, because we were taking running backs so early. So it was pulling those guys up the board. If you were just projected to lead your team in touches, you might go, Mike Davis or someone like that. Those guys were going in the 4th and 5th round. Well, now those guys, like you're saying, Mike, are going in the 7th, 8th round. So you could go into week 1 starting your 7th and 8th round pick and running back. It could be James Conner and Jalen Warren or whatever. You're
Mhm.
probably okay. You're probably okay. So you can take a James Cook. I think Derrick Henry is a great pick in the 3rd round. I think Saquon
Yep.
Barkley could be a great pick in the 2nd round. Every round there's a running back I like, but at the same time, I keep thinking, well, I'm going to like the running backs in the 7th, 6th, 7th, 8th round even better. And
Mhm.
doing this exercise like you do with tiers, or just reading his tiers, just go read his tiers and go through this mental exercise, and strategies just emerge. Just after doing the exercise, you're like, oh, well, I know how I'm going to handle that position, and
Mhm.
it makes it pretty simple. Even though you could spend hours and hours and hours preparing, or you could just read Fab's tiers, and you got a big head start. You mentioned Jonathan Brooks and you mentioned Bryce Young, and like
Mhm.
we talked about, we're looking at offenses. I think one of the biggest ways right now, big picture, to think is an offense that is going to improve greatly from last year. Because again, you can look across ADPs and you can see what the fantasy football community kind of thinks. And I mean, with the Carolina, you got a new offensive minded head coach who had success with his quarterback. They got a new center, Damian Lewis, and a new guard, Robert Hunt. I guess the idea being, with a short quarterback, you really want to keep the pocket intact right in front of him, and hopefully just
Mhm.
like you said, the short-lived Frank Reich regime wasn't as bad as Urban Meyer, but I think we could all see it wasn't going anywhere. But there's Carolina, but I'm going to toss out some
Mhm.
other offenses. I'm just going to talk a bunch of like the trash offenses based on fantasy football ADP. And I'm just curious. And and my criteria here basically is, there's not even anybody in the top 75 of fantasy football
Okay.
drafts in these offenses. Carolina's one of them.
Mhm.
Denver is one. People are
Mhm.
not impressed with Sean Payton and what they think he's going to do on offense this year. New England is one
Yeah.
with
I mean,
Alex Van Pelt. Go ahead.
yeah. Rhamondre, I mean, like, that's, to me, like, and you don't even know if that's a guaranteed thing. Remember, like 2 years ago, a lot of what he did was was as a pass catcher, and now they bring in Antonio Gibson. I still see him as like a, an RB2 type. But
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, there's there that the Patriots offense, that comes with a lot of questions from a fantasy perspective. It's all new. Right? I mean,
Right.
it's all new, right? I mean, you're going to see maybe Brissett will start. I don't know, but at some point it'll be Drake May. You've got a different backfield dynamic. Your wide receivers are almost all young, inexperienced type of players. As you mentioned, new offensive coordinator, a new head coach for the first time in forever. Patriots are. We're going to be like having a lot of questions answered about that offense and that team in general over the first 4 to 6 weeks to try and get a feel for what they actually are going to be.
Yeah, and there's a lot of forks in the road to see how they navigate this stuff because I like how you
Mhm.
just jumped right in and said Rhamondre Stevenson because Rhamondre Stevenson with a very similar outlook last year was going in the third or fourth round. Now I know Antonio Gibson's a better running back, has more to offer than Ezekiel Elliott, but
Mhm.
Antonio Gibson's role is not going to be that much bigger than Ezekiel Elliott's role. I mean, Ezekiel Elliott's role when Stevenson was healthy is bigger than people remember, and Stevenson still he didn't look like a bust. You didn't look like just a wasted pick, but all you see, and again, I'm reverse engineering Fabs. I'm like, well, if everybody is saying Rhamondre Stevenson should be going 3 rounds later than last year, why? Why? Is it
Mhm.
because I mean, did everyone just think Bill O'Brien was going to revitalize that offense, or last year they believed in Mac Jones? I don't think this situation overall is that much different than last year. So Stevenson definitely stands out as a guy that could be a potential value because and it gets right to the heart of my question, which was these offenses that we're overlooking. Sometimes the stink of the offense drags players down that it shouldn't because there's still even the worst
Mhm.
offense in the league is going to score X number of touchdowns, put up X number of yards, and someone's going to get some enough of that to mean something unless you're talking about like an historically bad offense. And I think that New England's probably those days are behind them because they don't have Matt Patricia as their offensive coordinator anymore. Well, I guess he wasn't the offensive coordinator. That wasn't
Was that
his
guy ever an
title.
offensive coordinator? I don't know what. Yeah, that year was just. I don't know what they were thinking there. So
Yeah, that was the year that it's like, well, the game has passed Bill Belichick by in some ways, and
yeah,
everybody.
I got news. I was praying the Cowboys would sign him and dump McCarthy. I'm so over McCarthy. Like, I've actually Mike is a nice guy. I've actually met him. I've had
Mhm,
conversations with him.
mhm,
His I know his one of his sons plays fantasy football. But, like, I mean, "Well, we won 12 games 3 years ago. Who gives a rat's ass? We're the
mhm,
Cowboys." You know what I
mhm,
mean? I mean, like, as much
mhm.
as that might sound elitist, like, we're
Right,
expecting as fans to be much better than to get knocked off in the first round of the playoffs every year. Uh, so I was like, "Well, bring Belichick in, and if Belichick can't
right.
fix it, then maybe it's a Jerry Jones thing." I think it's a Jerry Jones thing anyways. But
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't get my wish. Maybe I'll get my wish next year. I don't know.
Yeah, let's we're on the couch. We can talk. I mean, fandom is a big thing here, and how it messes with you, like emotionally, psychologically. Yeah, I've heard lots of different things. Some have said Cowboys faithful have said it's not Jerry, actually, it's Steven. It's Steven is the problem. I also have heard and kind of scoffed at that um, actually, this is all setting up for Deion Sanders to be the next head coach of the Cowboys. That's why you would have want Belichick to get hired, is to avoid that from happening. I don't think, and then it's his son getting drafted to replace Dak Prescott. Although, as a Cowboys fan, you have to always, and for fantasy and dynasty leagues, superflex leagues, every time I see something positive about Trey Lance, perhaps I'm like, they're setting everybody up
But he's
so
not
that they'll,
even but he's not even under contract for next year.
right?
So, like, and I I don't wanna it
That's
drives
it.
it drives
That's the quote.
it just drives
You
it
know?
drives me nuts, man. Because I remember the good old days, like, now, I'm 50, okay?
Okay,
I have been through the real awful Cowboys seasons,
sure,
like 1 in 15. The only game we won
right,
was against the Redskins at RFK, 13-3 when Steve Walsh was the quarterback. I
right.
went through 3-13. I went through 7-9. I went through the 80s, when we had garbage quarterbacks. Like a lot of my time as a Cowboys fan has not been that great. And people just think, oh, Cowboys, you're a bandwagon jumper, go pound sand. All right. Although my team affiliations will get me in trouble. But the bottom line here is that Cowboys haven't done jack nothing for almost 30 years. We haven't won a Super Bowl since 95. Sorry for that bad memory. We haven't been to an NFC championship game since 95. And every moment that we've had that's memorable in the last 25 to 30 years has been of disappointment. The ball going through Romo's hands against Seattle with with Martin Gramatica looking like he was going to, knock it through the uprights. Des Bryant, the catch that was not a catch, that was a catch. The comeback in Dallas with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, where he threw that P to Jared Cook on the sidelines, and Jared Cook typically couldn't catch a cold. And then Mason Crosby nails the field goal. And of course, I don't have to talk about the year that we went 13-3 and we're looking like a Super Bowl team under Wade Phillips, and the Giants come to town and kick our ass. And I don't remember how many penalties it was far too many. It's been nothing but disappointment. Now, I was hoping and praying that the Cowboys would draft a running back. I didn't care who the hell they drafted. It could, honestly, it could have been Kamani Vidal. I don't even give a shit. It could have been anybody, and I would have loved him. I would have loved him because the Cowboys have a historical trend of producing really good running backs. And listen, I know you could say, well, they had Zeke and they had Emmitt Smith. Darren McFadden was pretty good, for the short period of time that he was in Dallas. Marion Barber was pretty good. The Cowboys have almost always produced, good running backs. And even Pollard last year wasn't great, but he was still like a high RB2. I know it was not what we were hoping for, but I think he finished RB14. So, still very respectable, aside from the fact that we were expecting more from him. But I mean, like, geez Louise, Zeke Elliott, there was a stat that I had pulled up about him for last year, and it was he played as the featured back in New England for, I think it was, I want to say 6 games. And in those 6 games, he averaged like 20 touches a game. That's really good. 14.8 of those touches were rushes. He averaged 2.9 yards per rush. Okay. Bob Harris, who's 345 years old, give or take, could probably do that. Well, maybe not. But he could come close. The Bob Harris old joke was coming. You knew that. 66% of Zeke's points last year in PPR leagues came as a receiver. And so, like, listen, I'm a Cowboys fan. I love what Zeke did for us, and we didn't win a Super Bowl with him, but he filled up the stat sheets constantly as a fantasy running back. It's not the same guy anymore. I mean, is Rico Dowdle going to surprise us, or Royce Freeman, or Deuce Vaughn, who's shorter than me? Which that's not easy to do when you're a football player and you're shorter than me. So, listen, they say that running backs don't matter anymore. The Cowboys are going to put that to the test.
Yeah. And this was the team that famously overspent on Zeke Elliott in the draft, or at least took a running back number 4 when folks said that's old thinking. They at least paid Tony Pollard for 1 year. But I want to touch on, as a Cowboys fan, you laid out the emotional, psychological landscape. Mike McCarthy, I just want to bring up Mike McCarthy again for a second. I don't know if you've seen CJ Stroud and all the stuff he's been doing. CJ Stroud's going to be a asset for us in the football world, not just because of how exciting it is to watch him play or what he's going to do.
He likes to chirp.
Go ahead. Yeah, he does. He does. I like it, though. We need more of that. We need more of that.
The whole thing with Micah, right? Remember that? The whole thing with Micah about, like, the divisions. And so, no. But he was talking, and didn't he say that he thought Matthew Stafford would have won more Super Bowls than Rodgers?
Than Aaron Rodgers. But isn't that about Mike McCarthy? Like that? So isn't that a Mike McCarthy take, not an Aaron Rodgers take? I mean, because I look at how the Packers kept coming up short with Rodgers, and I never saw it as a Rodgers failure. There were a couple of games they played up in Green Bay that were kind of like those Cowboys losses in the playoffs when they underachieved so badly. But otherwise, Mike McCarthy would coach to keep the game close, like the famous NFC title game with the onside kick. He coached to keep the game close in playoff games instead of going for the killer instinct, the knockout blow. And that, I think, is part of that reason. You mentioned Belichick, and I just want to say that would be a callback to when they brought in Bill Parcells, and
But see,
all part of
I
that
loved Parcells.
debacle.
I
Yeah,
loved Parcells. I love him. And Parcells, not for nothing. I mean, he coached a Quincy Carter led team to 10 wins.
yeah.
Quincy
Oh
Carter
yeah,
stunk. Right? I mean, like, I
yeah,
remember when the Cowboys drafted him at the top of round 2, I'm like, "What in the freaking hell are you doing, man?
yeah, yeah,
Come
yeah.
on." And remember, the story goes that Jerry wanted Manziel the
Yeah,
year that we drafted Zach Martin.
right.
And the story also goes that the Cowboys wanted Paxton Lynch.
Yeah,
And then the
yeah, and then they wanted
Broncos moved
Connor
up,
Cook,
thank you, God, and took
right?
him.
Yeah, and they wanted Connor Cook too, and then the Raiders moved up and took
They
Connor
didn't
Cook.
want Dak Prescott. He
No,
wasn't like, he just, well, we need a quarterback. He's there.
that's one of the
Yeah.
saddest things about this era of the Cowboys too. It isn't even like the gods haven't smiled on them. They got Tony Romo, an undrafted free agent, one of the
Our
best quarterbacks of his era.
And not for nothing, we've done well in the drafts. We've done like, I
Yeah,
mean, Taco Charlton, like, I mean, obviously that one didn't pan out. I don't know if Mazi Smith's going to pan out. I hated that pick. I'm like,
right,
come on,
right,
not another Michigan defensive player. Like, I don't want, come on, let's not do that
right,
again.
right.
But I mean, we'll see what he can do in year 2. I don't know, but they've done typically pretty well in the draft. It's more about, what pisses me off is like, I see the Eagles. Okay. Now,
Hmm.
I'm a Cowboys fan from the tri-state area, so my hatred goes to the Giants. But I have no love
Sure.
for the Eagles, and I have no love for the Redskins/Commanders. Okay? But this Eagles team, they've got Jalen Hurts under contract. They gave A.J. Brown a lot of money. They gave Devontae Smith a lot of money. They went out and signed Saquon Barkley. Why the freaking hell can't the Cowboys do shit like
Right,
that? Like,
right, right, right.
because we don't know how to manage the damn cap.
Yeah,
Roseman is a
yeah.
genius, obviously. The Eagles
Right.
have good players on the defensive side, too. And look what they did in the draft. For crying out loud, they go, there's 2 young defensive players, the DBs, where you're like, those guys were both projected to be first-round picks. The Eagles got them both. I'm like, what the
Right.
hell?
Yeah.
If I'll
Yeah.
tell you what, the Eagles don't win that division this year and get to the NFC Championship game at least, that's a disappointment because that team's
Right.
wicked loaded. They're loaded.
Right. Right.
And,
Right.
you'll see
And
the Cowboys struggling with the cap, whereas the Eagles are signing all these guys to big contracts, these big name guys. It's like, what the hell? What
yeah.
is the Joneses missing? That
Right.
infuriates me, obviously.
Right. Right. It's the opposite of keeping up with the Joneses. And then just on, since you mentioned
Yes.
every time we mention Marion Barber, I want to say rest in peace. What a great character
I
he
loved
was.
watching him play, man.
Oh,
He was a fun player
yeah.
to watch. Yep. Yep.
He really
Yeah, that
was.
was
And
sad.
then
Remember
and
they had the duo with Felix Jones.
yeah.
And Felix
Yeah.
Jones was drafted in the first round because he went to freaking Arkansas, and that's the only
Yes.
reason why he wasn't that good.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah, anyways, all right, I'll
That
stop.
was the same. No, that was the same draft the Steelers took Rashard Mendenhall, who fumbled away a Super Bowl against Aaron. That's how Aaron Rodgers
Oh,
got his only Super Bowl win. Mike McCarthy was going to let the Steelers back into that one too, and then Rashard Mendenhall fumbled it away.
Mendenhall had like a year or two where he was a pretty good fantasy player, though. But yeah,
He did.
yeah.
And then of course we'll wind this up before we go off the rails and just say rest in peace and power. Larry Allen, man, I'm sorry for the
Yeah,
kids who
that's a
never got to
bummer.
watch Larry Allen play. And too many players
I
are dying too young. I mean, too many players. Larry Barber, Larry, too many guys. These guys are dying too young. But
I
Larry
yeah.
dominance. You know the word dominant, Fabs. We throw the word dominant around. A truly
Mhm.
dominant player.
Yep.
I mean, a player that like the sun got blotted out. He eclipsed the sun, and probably at his size, arguably the best athlete that we've watched in the NFL.
Well,
Because
remember the footage of him chasing down the defender who had made the
mhm,
interception down the
mhm,
sidelines. Like,
mhm,
Larry Allen I mean, he was a beast and he was a freaking powerful human being.
mhm,
But listen, I mean, he had some other gifts too, that
mhm.
most dudes his size did not possess.
No, not at all. Okay, off the rails. Fabiano. Michael Fabiano, a big, certainly one of the people that all of us we owe, except for maybe Bob Harris, because everybody owes Bob Harris. In the beginning, there was Bob Harris, right?
And that's
But
right. And then Bob Harris, right? He's like, um, he's like Moses with the 10 Commandments.
yeah,
Like he's like,
yeah,
right? I mean, like he's like the fantasy football version of that.
yes,
Thou
he
shalt not
is.
draft a
He is
quarterback in the first round. Whatever the
right.
hell it is. Right? He's really old.
Yep.
And I love him dearly. He's like one of my best friends, but I, any chance I take to get a shot at him for being an old man, I will
Yeah.
absolutely do it. I call him every
Yeah.
morning. I make sure that he takes his milk of magnesia
Yep. Yep. Yep.
to go along with his Metamucil and his cream of wheat. I make sure that he's
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Gotta
he's
stay
good.
regular.
I mean, for an old guy, he's on that Peloton all the time,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he keeps himself in shape. Yeah, so
He's gonna outlive
he's a
all of
good
us.
man.
Yeah, he's gonna
He
outlive all of
will.
us.
He
I still
will.
see that
Yeah,
he visits his both of his parents are still alive, so they must be at least
I
170.
know.
And he did that plant-based
They're in his
diet for a
80s, yeah.
while. Yeah, so, no, it's great. We love
And at
Bob
one
Harris, but
point, Bob Harris
mhm,
was a troubled child, and he
mhm,
was a very overweight individual. He
mhm,
did have hair at one point.
mhm, yeah.
That's long left him, but great guy. Yeah,
Oh, yeah. No, no,
great
we
guy.
we 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 truly love Bob Harris, but I gotta ask if you would not have ended up being a big gun in the fantasy football industry, uh, what what's an alternate life path for you? What's something else you're passionate about or some other way your life could have unfolded if not for fantasy football?
I always wanted to be a sportscaster for ESPN. I never thought about fantasy sports. I didn't.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
cannot remember ever wanting to be anything else except for
Yeah.
a sports anchor, a sportscaster. And, for a long time, I got to live out that dream on NFL Network where I was on live at half times of games in front of millions of people, and it was awesome. So I honestly don't know. See, I don't know what else I would have done. And I got to be honest with you. There was a point in my career before I got into the industry where I was ready to give up because I could not get in anywhere.
Mhm,
Anywhere. Like I was trying local TV. I
mhm,
couldn't get in anywhere, right? I couldn't get in anywhere. And I'm like, I was talking to my best friend and I was working at this company which had nothing to do with sports just to pay the bills. And my best friend was, one of the head honchos there. And I was like, Dan, I'm like, man, I think I'm just going to go for an account executive job here and just kind of do that because I
yeah,
can't get anywhere. I'm getting really frustrated. He's like, dude, you can't give up. And then,
mhm,
by the grace of God, a little bit of hard work, a little bit of luck, I ended up getting hired by commissioner.com, cbssportsline.com, right with Tristan Cockcroft, who's also one of my best friends.
mhm,
And, the rest is history. But I never, fantasy was never I played fantasy, but I was like, I'm going to be a fantasy football. They didn't exist. Like, it was like,
yeah,
I remember at that point, it was like Carabel and Funston,
right,
there were some, some folks out there, but it's not like what it is now. I always thought I'd be on Sports Center. I grew up in Connecticut. I
yeah,
didn't live far away from ESPN. I always thought I was going to be, at Bristol. And it's funny that
mhm.
I've worked for so many places, and Bristol's not one of them. But it is what it is. And but anything outside of sports, I don't know. I like to argue, so maybe like a lawyer, but I don't think I could get through law school.
You
That
could.
would, I don't know, dude. That
Trust
would
me,
be
I did. So
God.
I'll interject. Our stories aren't that different. When you're a kid and they say you can be whatever you want to be. Well, fine. I want to be the play-by-play announcer for the Pittsburgh Pirates. That's what I want to do.
Hmm.
And as a kid, like that's just what sounded good. That and starting the revolution. Um, and I went to Newhouse. If you want to be a sportscaster, you go to Newhouse. You go to Syracuse. You get into the broadcast journalism
Oh
program.
yeah, Syracuse. Yep, I got a lot of friends from there.
It took me you said something about East Coast lingo wicked. I learned all the different East Coast lingo whenever I was at Syracuse in the mid 90s. It was great too because it only took a couple of weeks for like the good new slang to make it up to Syracuse. Like people would go home to DC or Philly or New York or Boston or wherever, and then you'd
Mhm.
learn that everything was mad something or whatever. That's what the whatever the new slang
Right.
was.
Yeah.
And a year and a half into broadcast journalism, just like you were talking about, I mean, I could foresee what you were describing. Like it's really hard to get jobs in and that was in the 90s. It was really,
Yeah.
and you didn't get paid. You didn't get paid well. And it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work being a broadcaster because you had to set up the camera, you had to edit the sound and you had to do everything. You weren't just the talent. So I got my degree in philosophy and policy studies, and then it was the internet and fantasy sports that created a democratic media where you could just go out there and do it. And if people liked it, you could hang around and
Mhm.
grow your audience. And well, here we are. So the last thing I'll ask before we go off into the sunset is it's almost time for a vacation, right? Because we once training camp starts, our families don't get to see us until January, right? Um,
Mhm.
do you do anything before training camp starts? Do you take a vacation? Do you something just to like clear everything out and get ready for another season?
So now that I moved to Florida, and I lived in California for like 15 plus years when I was, the lead guy for the NFL Network. Um, uh, I I love Key West. I love the
Mm,
Keys. I freaking
mm,
love them.
mhm,
And
mhm.
I'm also a big fan of the paranormal. I love horror movies. I love all that stuff, right? So, Gary Barnage, who's a dear friend, and D'Angelo Williams, also a good friend of mine, they do a show on YouTube that's called Skeptic, and
Okay.
they are into the paranormal stuff. And so I would like to go to Key West with Gary and D'Angelo and some other people because Key West is one of the most haunted
Yeah,
cities
yeah,
or
yeah.
towns in the entire country. People
Right.
don't realize that it is 4-to-1 corpses to life people in Key
Mhm,
West.
mhm,
4-to-1. That's the ratio.
mhm,
There's a lot more
mhm,
dead than there are alive in Key West. The
mhm,
cemetery is amazing. They've
mhm.
got all kinds of stories. I don't know if you've ever heard of Robert the Doll. Like, we've heard of
Mm-mm.
Annabelle from, the Conjuring and
Okay.
the Raggedy Ann doll that's right from the Warrens. Like, there's a possessed doll, allegedly Robert the Doll, that's in Key West. There's a whole lot of haunted stuff that's gone, some really weird crap that's gone on there too. So I would like to get down there, but I think typically what I try to do is I'll take a week off in June.
Mhm.
I'll take a week off in July. I'm going back to California to go see my stepson and to go to Scott Fish in LA
Nice,
with Trophy Smack
nice.
because my pals are out there. So I'll get to see Lindsay and Jen Piacenti and James Roday and Matt Walsh and some other friends. So that'll be nice. So I'll go out there for 4 or 5 days. And then I'll probably try and take a little bit of time off in August around the expo because I'm going to try to get out to the expo this year
Nice.
in Canton. And yeah, but a lot of it's just kind of like just staycations. I live in Florida, for Christ's sake. I mean, like, I'm in
Right.
Florida. So, but I would love to get down to the Keys one more time before football season starts because I'd love to do
Yeah.
like an investigation at the cemetery or
Mhm,
I
mhm.
think it's called the Artist House, which is where the family that had Robert the Doll lived, and now it's a hotel.
Oh,
Like,
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
just stuff like that. Yeah,
Yeah, the
some stuff like
Hemingway
that.
house with all the cats, all this all
With all the
the those
cats.
cats with
The, Key West
6,
is
this
awesome. I love Key
it
West.
is,
It's
it
so
is,
cool.
it is. We found the other passion. It's obviously it's the paranormal, and then you need to come to New Orleans here where I
I
am because
Dude, I lived in Louisiana last year for like 3 months.
oh!
It surrounded a girl. It didn't work out. I wanna go down that. I will say this, New Orleans is crazy, like, haunted and has all
Mhm,
kinds of
mhm.
haunted history, and I would love to have, done an investigation somewhere, but as cool as New Orleans is to go and visit, that city's kinda gross. I
It's
gotta be
kinda
honest with
well,
you,
it's
bro.
like being
I
in
gotta
love
be
with a
honest with
crazy
you.
person.
Yeah, right.
It's
I
like
mean, like, when it was hot there, the whole place smelled like piss. I'm
well,
like, God
yeah,
damn,
yeah,
this is
yeah, yeah, yeah,
awful,
yes.
man.
So you try to get out of New Orleans during the summer. Definitely, New
Yes.
Orleans is no place to be during the summer. So
Yeah.
everybody else hibernates in the winter. In New Orleans, we hibernate in the summer. But come on down here, and we'll do a ghost tour. We'll do all kinds of cool
I
stuff.
did a
And then,
ghost tour
and I'll
there,
be
but I would love to do another one. Yes, I would.
there's an
The
no,
houses
no,
are awesome.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, there's a lot of beautiful stuff that goes on in Orange Bowl. You're talking about like, and then this one guy. There's people down there who are trying to screw you. They're trying to
Oh
like
yeah,
rob you, rip you off. Like
there's
one guy
instant
comes up
karma
to
here.
me
Yeah,
and he starts like trying to clean my sneakers. I'm like, dude, what the freaking hell are you doing right now?
yeah, yeah. You got
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah, 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 yeah. Dude, get the
no,
freaking
no,
hell off my foot
yeah.
before I kick
Just
you.
just
Like,
stay
I mean,
away
like,
from Bourbon
but
Street. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. There are places that you don't want to go, but there's
Right.
that one place. It was like I can't remember the name of it now for the life of me. Me and my best buddy went there,
Mhm.
but there's an old bar that's got no power. But you
Mhm.
might. I
The
mean, if
Lafitte's
you're
blacksmith shop. It's the
yes, yes,
oldest.
yes, that was so awesome. Such a cool
Yes.
place. Yeah, we went there and we had one
Yeah.
of those hurricane drinks.
Yeah,
Yeah, very cool.
that's the other end of Bourbon Street. That's the more fun
Yes.
end of Bourbon Street, closer to Esplanade. So we have to do this again so we can talk more
Yeah.
paranormal and talk more cool places like Key West and New Orleans. Michael Fabiano, everybody, we want to do the best for you always because the fantasy football community is the best for giving us the opportunity to do this. You do it because you're so classy.